right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on the morning on the West Coast time, afternoon on the East Coast time. We're really excited to bring you this exciting webinar discussing cannabis in the 117th Congress. I really wish that we could all be face-to-face as we were in 2019 and early 2020, but we now live in a Zoom world, and hopefully that will change again in the near future. But for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Lindsay Robinson, and I have the honor and privilege to be the executive director of the California Cannabis Industry Association. We represent over 400 businesses across the state of California, legal cannabis businesses within the supply chain, as well as ancillary businesses. And we cover everything from retail, manufacturing, distribution, and cultivation. So it's a huge cross section of the industry. We've been active and for the last 7 years, and we are the largest and most influential trade association working on state level policy reform. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, we primarily work, as I said, in Sacramento on regulatory and legislative reform, and we have many allies across the state. But what we really have come to understand through our years of policy work is that there are a number of large issues that can really only be solved on the federal level. And so for the last few years, we have been engaging a small group of folks on behalf of the California Cannabis Industry Association to work on issues, broader issues on Capitol Hill. So today we are very honored and proud to have two of our stalwart champions from California, Congressman Ted Lieu and Congressman Lou Correa. So thank you both for spending a little bit of time with us today. We're really honored to have you. So we'll take just a few more minutes to talk a little bit about the other folks who are going to be on this call today, or this webinar, I should say. We have CCIA Board of Directors and DICE co-chair, which stands for Diversity, Social Equity, and Inclusion Committee, Yvette McDowell. Say hello, Yvette.
Good morning, Congressman. It's great to have you here.
And then we also have a few of our federal policy advisors, which again is a small group of champions within CCIA that work closely with our allies in DC on the broader policy issues that we are working on behalf of legal California cannabis businesses. So from Poseidon Asset Management, we have Emily Paxia, Morgan Paxia, and Michael Bonello. Say hello. Thank you so much, Poseidon, for joining us. I'd also like to point out that Michael Bonello serves on the board of CCIA and has taken on the honor of being treasurer this year, and also co-chairs our legislative committee. So he jumped right in. We're really, really proud to have you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Another one of our federal policy advisors is on today, Hirsch Jain, who is the head of government relations for Caliva. Say hello, Hirsch.
Congressman, good morning. Thank you for your time today.
Excellent. I do want to mention one of our other federal policy advisors who is not on the call, Jack Nichols of Harborside. Harborside is an Oakland-based dispensary. It's one of the oldest in the country and has really helped to shape California cannabis policy over the past many years. So we're sad that Jack can't join us, but he has met with both of you, I believe, in DC before. So let's get started today. We want to, I also want to introduce Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who represents Oakland as well. She is not able to join us today, but she graciously recorded a very brief message for us. So we wanted to play that right now, and then hop into some live questions with the Lieu Caucus, as I believe we're calling you all. So Justin, if you wouldn't mind queuing up that video.
Say the wokest district in the nation. Thank you so much to Ms. Robinson for your gracious introduction, and thanks to the CCIA for all of your work on behalf of this critical industry in my district and throughout California. As co-chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, I've been on the front lines for many years fighting for reform of discriminatory cannabis policies and laws that have perpetuated systemic racism in our country. To me, this is also a racial justice issue. From the criminal justice system to our workforce, far too many lives have been ruined because of archaic federal cannabis policy, and a disproportionate share of them have been people of color. Americans in 5 more states voted overwhelmingly to liberalize their cannabis policies during the November elections. And in December, the United States House of Representatives took the historic step of passing the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act, the MORE Act, to remove marijuana from the Federal Controlled Substance Act and enact restorative justice for communities of color most impacted by prohibition. In this Congress, I am again proud to be working toward the passage of comprehensive cannabis reform legislation, including the Safe Banking Act, of which I am an original co-sponsor and was just reintroduced in Congress last week. And of course, I will continue to look for ways through the appropriations process as an appropriator to support decriminalization and restorative justice. We made more progress on cannabis reform in the 116th Congress than we ever had before, and we will continue our fight for equitable cannabis policy. In 2021, the federal government needs to get with the program in the disastrous war on drugs and align with the majority of the country on common sense cannabis reform. I am confident that we can work together to make this happen in the 117th Congress. Thank you all again to everyone who is watching this, and thank you to my colleagues who are participating today. Stay safe, and I hope to see you all in person on the other side of this pandemic. Thank you again.
Thank you. Well, it was always inspiring to hear Congresswoman Lee's remarks. I know they hit close to home for a lot of us. So thank you for helping to coordinate her speaking with us today. I know she couldn't be here in person, but grateful to have her say some remarks. She has been a champion for social justice and policy reform for a really long time. So we're grateful to have her leadership on these issues. But now I want to turn my attention over to Congressman Liu. I'm interested to hear your perspectives on opportunities for meaningful cannabis policy reform in this Congress.
Thank you, Lindsay, for your question, and want to thank CCIA for inviting me to speak. And I'm honored to be on this event with Representative Lou Correa, who I've served with for many years, both in Congress as well as the California State Legislature. And we both supported cannabis reform when we were in the state legislature as well. In fact, when I was in the state legislature, I was one of the authors of the argument in favor of Proposition 64 that decriminalized marijuana statewide in California. And I think we need to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level. It is, for me, first of all, insanely stupid that we would have cocaine and fentanyl listed at a lower schedule rating than cannabis. And it's also clear to me that cannabis is no more dangerous than alcohol, for example. And if we're going to not put alcohol on the schedule of controlled substances, there's no reason that cannabis should be on that schedule. I think it's a huge waste of taxpayer funds to spend even one dime prosecuting and investigating cannabis crimes. And my hope is we can remove cannabis from this schedule. It's why I was a co-author of the MORE Act last term. That will be reintroduced again this term. And hopefully we can get it past the US Senate. We will get it past the US House. I'm confident of that. I'm also co-author of the Safe Banking Act, which did also pass the House last term, and I'm confident it will also pass the House again this term. The challenge will also be the US Senate. We do have to have 60 votes unless they change the filibuster rule. Now, the good news is there are a number of Republicans who are from states where cannabis either is legal in some way or will be legal at some point in the future. And so I do have hope that we can get some stuff done this term, and a lot of the challenge will be with the US Senate.
Thank you for that. I appreciate those remarks. I know we have a couple of our FPA members who have teed up a couple questions, but first off, I really want to truly thank you for your leadership on this issue in both California and in DC. As many of you know, cannabis policy reform, it often feels like it's two steps forward, one step back, and it has taken many, many years for us to achieve the progress that we have now. And we wouldn't be here without leadership like yours. So we're incredibly grateful. I'm going to turn it over now to Michael Bonello. I know you, Congressman Liu, I know you have a tight time frame here, but we're going to try to sneak a couple questions in. Michael, take it away.
Great, thank you, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. My question has to do with recent news out of the White House that indicated that several staffers were terminated or forced to resign due to prior cannabis use. Yet Merrick Garland indicated in his confirmation hearing that he didn't plan on using Justice Department resources to go after state legal cannabis conduct. And so I'm wondering, what do you think, or why do you think we're getting such mixed messages from this administration? And ultimately, what can Congress do to help clarify the administration's position on cannabis?
Thank you, Michael, for your question. I am one of the signers of a letter from Representative Perlmutter out of Colorado to President Biden asking exactly that question to clarify why they are doing this. My personal view is no one actually cares whether or not you use marijuana in the past or whether or not you use it now. It is not a national security issue, not a national security threat. I'm sure if someone used marijuana in the past and they disclosed it, no one would care. And so it is confusing to me why the White House took those steps that we're asking for clarification. This also reminds me of something that happened actually during the Obama administration. One of the first amendments I actually got into a bill on the House floor was reducing funding to the marijuana eradication program. It made no sense to me that you had a number of states that had legalized marijuana, and then now you have the federal government jacking up prices by reducing the supply of cannabis. And so it's sort of these mixed messages are very confusing to the American people, and we are seeking clarification of that policy right now with the White House.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I believe that you have a final question for Congressman Liu.
I do. Congressman Liu, again, thank you for being here. I first want to say that as a former prosecutor, the words that you echoed, oh my God, they resonate so much with me as to how stupid it is to have prosecuted cannabis offenses, especially for de minimis amounts. And being from California, as both of you are, I entered the cannabis space in end of 2017, beginning of 2018, and really launched into Los Angeles, being considered the largest cannabis market in the world. As you know, the city of Los Angeles has adopted a social equity program. And that program definitely came about because individuals who had been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. But the reality is that the program has been incredibly frustrating for people of color trying to enter this space. They've been saddled with exorbitant fees for licensing and other types of requirements necessary, long waiting times, which is amounted to expending exorbitant amounts of cash that they really don't have, predatory lending agreements, which I've had the pleasure of reading many of these agreements, and they truly are one-sided, and a lack of needed infrastructure to help applicants navigate through the requirements. So, question I have with that background is, how do we ensure that any federal cannabis equity provisions, even though they may look good on paper, are actually going to help people that they were intended to help?
You're talking about a City of Los Angeles program, right?
Correct.
All right. So first of all, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I was not aware of those issues. So we will reach out to Los Angeles City Councilman Mike Bonin, who I'm friends with, who is very supportive of cannabis reform. And so let us talk to him. In addition, the district offices of me as well as Representative Lou Correa remain open during the pandemic. our staff members work remotely, but they're handling constituent cases. And if anyone has specific issues related to cannabis programs or issues related to different agencies, we can help you with federal agencies. We can definitely put you in touch with the relevant people at state or local agencies. So please feel free to reach out to our district offices as well.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Great. I believe that is all the time that we have with Congressman Liu. We look forward to seeing you in person as soon as we're able. Thank you so much again for your time and all of your energy on helping to reform these policies. And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Good to see you, Ted.
You too.
Good to see you, Lou.
Take care. Okay. Lou Correa, you're up.
Yeah.
I know you have a tight time frame as well.
I do. I have to chair a committee in a half an hour and I got to get ready for that. But I wanted to thank all of you for your interest. And let me just follow Ted Liu's lead here. It's hard to follow my good friend, such a great speaker. But like him, I'm also principal co-author of the MORE Act, the Safe Banking Act. And I've also written this bill called the Correa Bill. You look behind me, there's pictures of all the Orange County men and women that have made the ultimate sacrifice since 9/11. And the Correa Bill was essentially a bill that is trying to force, literally compel the Veterans Administration to study the effects of cannabis on veterans. I got into this space of cannabis a decade ago, more than that, because my veterans said, we want cannabis. We don't want opioids, we want cannabis. And the question is, what's cannabis good for? What is it not good for? We know it has medical properties. We just don't know what else it's good for and under what doses. That's all I want is research. And I say research data because think about our situation today. We are essentially, and to Michael's question on the Biden administration, this is the result, 50, 60 years of a failed drug policy, war against drugs in this country that has been based not on data, but on fiction and political rhetoric. Now it's going to be very hard to turn this super tanker around in a dime, so to speak, and begin to legislate on facts. Talk about cannabis, but this is an issue related to drug policy in this country overall. You look at what's going on with the refugee crisis. You look at this stabilized continent. It's all because of the dollars, because of the drugs that are a result of our dollars that are fueling a lot of those issues. And so the elephant in the middle of the room is American drug policy failed in how it just, cascades into other parts of the world. And 50, 60 years of misinformation. I'll give you an example. I was at a town hall, a community forum in my district a number of years ago. And one of my Garden Grove police officers and I were talking about cannabis shops, and we were all on the same page. And then this woman puts her hand up, this senior citizen, and says in broken English, broken Spanish, she says, my doctor told me that cannabis is the only thing that can help my terminal cancer. And then she goes on to say, but I'll be damned if I ever become a marijuana, a drug addict. I will never touch marijuana. And she was crying because this was her last hope to stay alive. But she wouldn't take it because she was brought up thinking that if you did marijuana, you were evil. And this is the challenge that we have. Talk about the Biden administration. I guarantee you that sentiment is still there. I'll sign a letter for you. I'll make phone calls for you. But this is something we have to change in society. The outcome, the prospects, I'll be honest with you, it's going to be tough. Last year we had a town hall and we had some other my colleagues with us, and a question was asked on cannabis. Do you see a prospect for something happening in 2020? And I very nicely said, hell no. My colleague said, hell yes. 2021, it's going to be tough to get anything done. Whether it's banking, whether it's the MORE Act, whether it's the Correa Act, hopefully, but we need to keep pushing. And you know, I want to spill a little cold water into our optimism to let you know we've got to work really hard to get this done. Okay, more than half of our population is under a jurisdiction where cannabis is not only medically legal, but probably now recreationally legal. Canada is legalized cannabis. Mexico is about to legalize cannabis. And we are sitting right in the middle of flawed federal policy. Shame on us. Shame on us. But that's a challenge to all of us that we've got to double down and continue to re-educate and educate our community. You know, I'm going to correct Ted Lieu a little bit. The most dangerous drug in the world is alcohol. Cannabis is not as bad as alcohol. Alcohol is the most horrible drug that we have in our society. With that, I'll open it up for a question or two, then I've got to leave.
Thank you, Congressman Correa. I am going to turn it over to Hirsch. I believe you have a question, although some of that might have already been addressed by the congressman.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your time today, Congressman Correa. My question pertains to how we should realistically be thinking about cannabis reform in this Congress. And as Lindsay mentioned, I think you pretty effectively addressed this in the remarks that you just gave. But you know, many of us, when it became clear in January that the Democrats would have control over Congress for the next couple of years, there was a lot of enthusiasm about the prospects for reform, a lot of press. But you know, many of us have heard exciting headlines before, only to be disappointed. As you pointed out, Congressman Correa, the negative sentiment about cannabis has been embedded in the public consciousness for decades. And as Congressman Lieu pointed out, you know, before he left, anything will need 60 votes in the Senate. So in light of that, how do you think advocates like us should be approaching reform going forward?
I think you got to keep punching hard. If the sovereign state of Alabama decides they don't want legalized cannabis, knock yourselves out. Okay, we'll have your good citizens of Alabama come to California and buy your cannabis. We'll sell you legal cannabis. Home, you know, never mind. So what we've got to do is essentially keep pushing other states to continue to essentially recognize cannabis is a recreational as well as a medical solution. And at the same time, I think we have to make sure that at the federal level, that no federal resources are used to enforce federal laws that prohibit cannabis. I think that's something we can do. It's realistic, but let's show that the Biden administration sticks to this policy. And just continue to educate folks out there, okay? People, like one of my police chiefs said to me probably a decade ago when we were talking about cannabis policy in California, one of my police chiefs said to me, he said, Lou, you know, all of us know drunks that get drunk and get violent and get mean and nasty. And he says, and he told me, he said, I know most people that smoke cannabis, most people, all people that smoke cannabis, the worst they do is they go raid your refrigerator, eat you out of house and home, then they go to sleep. I mean, we've got to educate people on what cannabis is really all about and move ahead. And that's part of my bill is just to force the VA to research cannabis, because we have not had any viable, serious medical research in this country into cannabis. And you know, Israel has, and that embarrasses me that this country is able to do this, and we're still, you know, sticking our head in the sand, not acknowledging reality.
Yeah, thank you for that response. I'm going to try and sneak one more question in, Morgan. I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Great. Thank you, Congressman Correa, and absolutely agree with you about education. We've been doing education for 8 years now for investors and media and the like, and so it still is a big part of what we do, and there's a lot of work to be done. Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler recently said he was planning on reintroducing the MORE Act. As I understand it, that bill wasn't going to advance in the Senate during the last Congress and may now compete with the bill that Majority Leader Schumer has coming soon. The machinations of Washington are a bit baffling to outsiders. Can you help explain what the play might be here?
Oh my God. You're asking me for what the play is, huh?
Yeah.
From 30,000 feet up in the air, I would say this is a good development that the leader of the Senate is introducing legislation on cannabis. This is good. This essentially is good for a debate in the Senate to discuss some possible areas of an agreement. And so I would say I'm hoping that a deal is struck between the congressional and Senate legislation to come up with something, a win-win sort of, so to speak. But again, I would say we are going to be fighting uphill on this one. On the other hand, right now, the issue in front of us in this country is immigration, refugees, and that seems to be where all the focus is at. And so there's a possibility that as this legislation comes up in the Senate, you know, the press's negativity on cannabis maybe will not be there. And therefore give us the opportunity to move something.
Yeah, let's hope. Well, I know that CCIA and our federal policy advisors are going to continue to push extremely hard on these issues and work with our allies in DC, including Congressman Correa, and hopefully, you know, make some real positive advances this year and over the next several years. So I know that you need to depart. Just want to express our gratitude again for your leadership, for your willingness to talk to us. Just for your openness to work with folks in the cannabis space. We're really grateful.
Thank you very much to all of you for your good work, and let's continue to work together. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Mr. Correa. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Okay. Well, now we are going to shift our focus just a little bit. I will encourage if anyone who is attending the webinar has any questions for the federal policy advisors or our friends at the liaison group who we'll be talking to in just a little while about strategy on the federal level, please feel free to submit those questions. I'm so glad that we got both of those guys to join us for a little bit. I know that their schedules are super crazy. So that was really nice. I would like to switch our attention over to a brief conversation with Yvette. As I introduced earlier, Yvette is not only on the board of directors of CCIA, but co-chairs our Diversity, Inclusion, and Social Equity Committee. She's a total badass, and we're super grateful that we have her in leadership at CCIA. I cannot tell you what a pleasure it has been to work with her over the last couple of years. So we want to do a little bit of a deep dive into the DICE committee and what we're working on, and kind of the role that we think that DICE is playing currently in the broader social equity conversation in California.
Absolutely. Well, Lindsay, thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate that. So let's talk. Let's talk. You know, the DICE committee, when I first joined as a board member and started initially chairing the DICE committee, there were a lot of things that we were faced with in regards to social equity, things that were not happening that needed to happen. So that was our first venture in bringing some type of strategy together where we could tackle what is going on with social equity, not only from the local level, but from the state level as well. And the one thing that we've learned from California, we need to have a framework, a state framework in particular for social equity. And these particular measures, they must be in place from day one, whether that's the states, whether that's the localities, you have to have a framework in place. People need to have a roadmap, for lack of better words, as to where are we going? Where do we start? How do we start? And when you don't have a roadmap and you don't know where you're going, people will be lost. They will not know what to put in. And so what we're seeing is a bunch of patchwork programs within California, and it's simply not working the way it should. So as far as DICE is concerned, we are digging in. We're talking with legislators at the state to talk about language that needs to be changed, to talk about different policy that needs to be in place to hold cities, counties accountable for what they're doing with social equity. There's lots of money that's being spent on these respective jurisdictions, but that money is not trickling down to the people it was intended for. So those are some of the things that DICE is doing at this point in time. Um, you know, and I'll stop right there just to let you jump in if you have some questions.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really focused on in 2019 was our Language Matters document, yes, which really, I think, dovetails really nicely with what Congressman Correa was just speaking about in changing broader perceptions around cannabis use, and really helping to change the stigma. And part of that is being really conscious of the language that we're using. So we're happy to make that available to any of the participants on this call. It's on our website. It's been a really valuable resource. We've shared it with a lot of members of Congress and state legislators as well, to really help them bring some consciousness to the language piece of it.
Absolutely, Lindsay. And why language matters. We're dealing with archaic terms in the cannabis industry that has just been spread like wildfire. And when you look at the origins of some of that language, this is why the preferred language document was created in the first place. We wanted to help people transition from using language such as black market, looking at its origins. And that paper spells that out. It's very clear as to why we need to change our use in language. So I would encourage everyone to get a copy of that document and read it, and encourage others that you know who are using language that does not fit within this industry to change the language that you use, so we can bring truly the professionalism in our dialogue to bear when we're speaking. And currently we are taking on a new project called the Accountability Project. And this came about, it's a springboard from what I was alluding to earlier about jurisdictions not being held accountable and misusing the funds that they're being given from the state. So the Accountability Project is designed to do just that. Hold these folks' feet to the fire and make sure they are doing with the funds that they are taking from the taxpayers to use it for social equity as it was intended to do. Not on your administrative work, but on the actual applicants who are desperately in need of an infrastructure, loans, other things to move forward. So this is a huge project for us, but it's one that is near and dear to every member of the committee's heart. And we're going to hold people accountable for that. And I'm certainly going to take Congressman Lieu up on his offer of help. He put it out there. And so I'm going to follow up with him, his staff, whomever it is, where they can help us at least with the city of Los Angeles, which in my opinion right now has really been very disappointing for social equity. And we need help. We need help. And if his office can help us move some of this along, we're going to do it.
Yeah, it's painful to see some of the social equity programs struggle as much as they do. And I think part of it is because it was not necessarily prioritized in the beginning when we were talking about statewide policy reform. And so if there's one thing to note for other states that are looking to move forward with legalization, that social equity really needs to be a priority from the beginning, and also needs to be a state-run program, right? Statewide program. The patchwork of local programs, I think, is just incredibly hard to manage. And, we've spent a lot of time now focusing on this accountability project to make sure that those funds that are being allocated to those communities are being spent on the folks that need it the most. That's something that ideally the state would be overseeing and helping with, but we've been able to step in I think a meaningful way, and hopefully while folks are going through this process in other states, they'll learn from our mistakes, really. And I think that's probably hopefully going to be the benefit that comes out of all of this work, is that other folks won't have to necessarily follow in our footsteps, and I think that's an important piece. So Yvette, I want to talk a little bit about, I know we have discussed a lot of the sort of criminal justice reforms that are potentially happening on the federal level, and emphasis that is being given to those items. And I really want to talk about balancing sort of business interest for BIPOC individuals who are either license holders or trying to get into the industry, and making sure that we have kind of a balanced focus on the social justice, sort of criminal justice piece of it, and business interests for small businesses across the country.
Mm-hmm. You know, Lindsay, you said something the other day in conversation when you talked about a three-legged stool. And as I said, all of this, there's this symbiotic relationship between criminal justice, between the business world and social equity. You can't really do one without the other in many respects. Uh, we want to bring social equity applicants, business owners, into the market where they can flourish. Flourish just like traditional businesses can flourish. And this is one of the areas where we need to have safe banking. I mean, that is critical for us to have safe banking so they can take advantage of being able to open up checking accounts, get business loans, just like non-cannabis businesses do. You know, so when you look at the business community, there's not much difference. It's just a different widget that we're dealing with here. You know, while you may be dealing with crayons over here, the cannabis businesses are dealing with cannabis. It's just a different widget, but all of the business fundamentals are the same. So the business community has a big part to play in helping these new budding entrepreneurs come into the industry with the skill set that they need. You know, when you look at that and you also bring the criminal justice arena in, as far as enforcement goes, we cannot continue to try to enforce our way out of the illicit market. There must be the reform in place to help bring people from the illicit market to participate in a regulated industry, a legal industry, so that they can grow businesses, that they can flourish as well. And when we bring our business community in, when we bring our law enforcement in and really educate them on where enforcement should be, and that is with people who simply said, you know what, I'm not coming into a regulated market. I don't care what you do. Then, okay, enforcement is proper in that respect. But someone trying to come out for the first time and do the right thing, come on, let's not put the hammer down on their heads where they can't do anything. So you have to take all of these and look at them together, because again, there is that symbiotic relationship between each and every one of them. And this is what we want to look at. We want that economic justice. We want criminal justice to work. We want social equity to work. And the only way we're going to do that is to educate, reform, and get the respect of people involved that needs to be involved.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for that perspective. I think too, you know, having worked in this arena on cannabis policy reform for 15 plus years, it's incredibly daunting to think about what's ahead of us and how far we still need to go. But also, I am an optimistic person despite everything else. And I still feel like we have the capacity to make this industry truly unique and truly special, and prioritize women-owned businesses and BIPOC-owned businesses, and you know, and small businesses. And I think that it's really important for us to think about how far we've come and not just focus on the tasks ahead. But if we don't learn from the mistakes that we've made, which I think part of that too is, you know, this has kind of never been done before with an industry that is this diverse. And so there's certainly going to be mistakes made, but focusing on what we can do to really, you know, incrementally move forward, because that's the only way that we have ever seen progress and policy reform in the cannabis space, is incrementally. And so, you know, I know that sometimes it's harder to see things that way, but I think it's important to have that perspective that, even with a democratically controlled Congress and president, you know, we might not see all of the reform that we want in the next 18 months.
Well, we can certainly start on the state level and get some changes. That's one of the reasons that DICE is beginning to get more politically active and getting involved with bills and helping to create language for bills. We really need to be engaged on that level and not just the ground level where the business owners reside. Yeah. So we have to do both. And that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I'm incredibly grateful that you are on our team and are, you know, that we're all working together. I learned so much from your leadership. So thank you so much. We are going to transition over to have a quick conversation with our friends at the liaison group, Safira Galoub and David Mangone. I have to say, over the past 2.5 years that we have been working together on the federal level, I think your tireless effort has really broadened the perspective of CCIA in general. And I think that you have helped us derive so much member benefit by your tireless work. I would love for us to expand a little bit kind of on where we've been and where you see us going. And for all of our executive members that are joining, this is just part of your membership with CCIA, is this federal representation, which I think is hugely important. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. And I'm joined by my Director of Policy, David Mangone, who's arguably I think the smartest guy on cannabis policy in the country. If you have a question, he has an answer. So anytime you have a question, CCIA members, you let us know. We're on it. The Liaison Group is a DC-based lobbying firm, and we focus on federal cannabis policy. We focus federal only and cannabis only. So if it's happening in Washington, we have our finger on the pulse. During this call, Congressman Perlmutter's office reached out about a very nuanced piece, probably in connection with what California is concerned about. And the reason this is important for CCIA is that California has 55 members of House and Senate delegation, 53 in the House and 2 in the Senate. And if you think about the composition, particularly on the House and with Speaker Pelosi and a Leader McCarthy, the importance of organizing, as Yvette mentioned, the pathway and prioritizing the policy is crucial for aligning the members of the California delegation to speak on behalf of the playbook that CCIA wants. You know, it is evident by our conversation today that there's a lot to accomplish, and we have some incredibly important generational changing goals, and we need to be pragmatic. And we need to advance what is possible. And so one of the things we've been doing with CCIA, with the federal policy advisors, and with your membership at the executive level and throughout, is we've been organizing CCIA's voice in DC. We have been meeting with the entire delegation. When we were in person, Hirsch and Emily and Morgan and Michael and Jack all had to fly to DC pretty frequently for back-to-back meetings with the delegation. And what we learned with a Congressman Correa and a Congressman Liu is that they need to hear your voice. They need to know what is important, so that, for example, when it came time for one of the HEROES Acts, which is one of the COVID packages, to have an opportunity to have the safe banking back included, the entire California delegation, we activated a letter on behalf of the delegation. And then, because of CCIA's influence throughout the state, we reached out to key members in the city of Los Angeles and in San Francisco, and the chambers of commerce and the treasurer's office. And we connected those voices of influence, not just to members of the delegation, but the members of the delegation to Speaker Pelosi. And by her hearing that these issues are our priority to this organization, which is, you know, more than 500 businesses strong, not just the biggest industry association in the state, but in the world, the biggest cannabis economy in the world, to know that this is a priority and should be a priority for this speaker in this Congress at this moment, that changes the importance of the issue. And so if we're not organized, if we don't have, as Yvette mentioned, we don't have that playbook and that framework, We've got a lot of noise, we have a lot of activity, but we don't have a plan, and therefore we don't have progress. And so it is CCIA's literally the first industry association to do this level of work in Washington. Other folks have done fly-ins, but nobody else has met this consistently with this Congress, with this level of priority. Nobody else, when, and I want to mention this because it's so important, when the insurrections happened around the country and all of the violence happened, within 24 hours, CCIA had written to its entire delegation, 53 members, to let them know what was going on throughout Congress. And so they were able to lead within their delegation. So no other industry association has organized their message so carefully and consistently. And this is what state delegations or congressional delegations from individual states need. So thank you for your investment and your trust in us. We continue to stand here and stand ready. We're going to take questions as well. But I wanted to make sure, Lindsay, to let folks who are meeting us for the first time understand what it is we're doing, what it is we're investing in, and what it is we're returning as value for this organization. So you can tell I'm excited and really committed to CCIA, but I'll stop talking and open for questions or other comments.
I love that. I'm going to encourage folks, if you're watching, if you would like to submit some questions, please go ahead and do so now. Thank you for that enthusiasm, Safira. That's exactly the energy we need.
and Lindsay, as far as the Hill staff that is still on this call, our thanks to you all for attending. Certainly, if we haven't worked together in the past, would love to set up an initial get-to-know-you meeting, talk about the efforts CCIA has done over the past year and how we can incorporate your boss into any of those efforts. But I know there's a few of you on the call who have been very supportive of CCIA, including our delegation letter to Speaker Pelosi this past spring, led by Congresswoman Porter, and then, of course, Representatives Liu and Correa. So thank you all for your attention, for attending, but we're happy to take questions.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Yeah. And I think, one of the things that we have really worked on at CCIA on the state level is being a resource, not only for our members to understand what's happening in the regulatory and legislative landscape, but vice versa. So being a resource and an educational tool for lawmakers, because we get to work with these cannabis businesses every day. We get to see their pain points. We get to see what they're excited about, and I think that's an incredibly valuable exchange. And that's also something that through our federal policy advisors, which is this lovely group on the webinar today, and the liaison group, we've been able to do on the federal level as well as state. Which is a really unique combination. So I think we've had a question come in about specific strategy around banking. So obviously CCIA has been, heavily invested in moving safe banking forward. It has been a priority of ours. So I'd love to maybe touch a little bit on where that bill stands and strategy for moving it forward.
Yeah. So, is that directed to me, Lindsay? I just want to make sure.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So we are very actively working on what we call a WHIP strategy for safe banking. So as you may remember, safe banking moved through the last Congress through the House quite easily through suspension. And we expect that to happen in the spring. In the Senate, with its recent introduction and new Republicans and the necessity for 60 votes, our focus is on making sure that we have enough Republicans and enough Democrats to make it 60 votes so that when we get to have a vote, we've got the support. So that means Republicans from states who have legal programs, who haven't yet kind of gotten with the program, or people who their states may be under consideration, or people who just need to understand the industry better. So it's focusing right now on Senate Republicans. It's also ensuring that on the Senate side, we identify a legislative vehicle to advance SAFE. So one of the things that's really important with congressional, just the realities of Congress, is that unless there is a legislative pathway, a process forward, we get weighted down by all of the political dynamic and all the priorities in Washington, because cannabis is not the #1 priority in Washington, unfortunately. We have to identify the legislative vehicle. And part of that is figuring out what's moving And the other part is convincing the leadership. So in this case, it's Leader Schumer and committee leaders on the Senate side to help or to kind of pave the way and to encourage them to let safe banking take that lead. On the Senate side, we have some additional work to do in the Senate Banking Committee because there hasn't been a hearing on this bill. And so when there is, what we want to do is generate the enthusiasm, the support, the curiosity, the education, so that every lawmaker in the Senate knows that this is a policy that can pass, should pass, and must pass in this Congress. So hopefully that helps answer your strategy about safe banking.
Great, thank you for that. Oh, sorry, David.
Yeah, Lindsay, I'll dovetail on that. In terms of the MORE Act and other comprehensive reform bills, we're going to have two, very good opportunities this Congress. The first being the MORE Act as it's revised by the Judiciary Committee, and the second, of course, is the bill that Leader Schumer, Senators Booker and Wyden have committed to bringing forward to the floor. So right now, as we're looking at safe banking, it's a little bit of first mover advantage. That bill was reintroduced without many changes. And hopefully that means we can move it quickly through the congressional proceedings. As far as the Schumer bill and the MORE Act, those are going to take a little bit more legislative thought. They are a little bit more complex than what safe banking proposes. At its core, safe banking is relatively straightforward in terms of what the bill actually does. But when you get into some of the broader concepts of legalization, those take a lot more back and forth, a lot more development, and really because you're looking at undoing 50 plus years of bad policy, it's going to be a more complex bill. So those are coming out in due time, but right now we have the opportunity to move quickly on safe with the successful vote in the House last year, and then we'll have another opportunity once those bills are ready for us to start building support for in the same way we are with safe banking.
Great, thank you, David. Well, we're almost at time. I did want to just turn it back over to the FPA members. If you have anything else you'd like to say to the folks watching, or questions for David and Safira. We meet quite regularly, so there might not be any, but Michael, go ahead.
I was just going to thank Safira and David and Courtney, the whole liaison group team here for shepherding federal policy for CCIA. We've definitely made some inroads, and I have to say, my time I've spent with the liaison group and Lindsay in Washington, D.C. has really been about education. And I think the congressman earlier, was making that point that the hardest thing, that one of the biggest challenges in getting legislation pushed through is just educating our policymakers on this industry. And I was surprised in DC how little so many knew, and it's an opportunity for us. And I think that education has put CCIA ahead of a lot of other policy groups. So we continue to work hard on your behalf. And thank you, Liaison Group.
For sure.
Absolutely. And Lindsay, I just want to piggyback on what Michael said. I really appreciate having a federal group like the liaison group, Safira and David, going to DC and putting the spotlight on social equity. I'm not seeing many groups do that at all from these trade associations out here, but through CCIA, having put a spotlight on social equity to make sure that it becomes equitable. As the framers have stated, you guys have did a phenomenal job in keeping it at the forefront and not letting it get lost, but just to educate people on it. So I thank you so much for that. And as the work continues, I feel rest assured knowing that you will be there advocating on behalf of social equity and helping us to carry this through. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for spending the last hour with us. Thank you, Liaison Group, for helping to coordinate this effort. Thank you to our FPA members. You help keep this work focused and fire-powered. Thank you to all the CCIA members that were joining us today. Thank you, Justin, for helping to staff the webinar. If you'd like to get in touch with any of us, here's our contact information. Thank you to our executive members and also to the Capitol Hill staffers that were able to join. We hope you found this conversation helpful, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day, everyone.